On today's show, the Capitals haven't had this kind of draft ammunition in years, and Ross Mahoney just tipped his hand on exactly what the organization wants.
Hey, this is Ryan Leonard from the Washington Capitals. Tune in to my favorite podcast, Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello, and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dan HOLMI, and today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Odoo. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That is odoo.com/lockedon. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about Spencer Carberry getting locked up long-term by the Capitals. This wasn't some routine extension. The Caps reportedly tore up the old contract and handed Carberry one of the richest coaching deals in hockey. What does that tell us about where Chris Patrick believes this organization is headed? A bit later, we'll talk about Ross Mahoney said the quiet part out loud. The Capitals want size, bigger centers, bigger defensemen. So who actually fits? We'll go name by name and discuss Wirhoff, Krells, Pepperinen, Morozov, and a lot more. But where we will start is what Ross Mahoney told reporters, because he essentially gave us the blueprint for what the Capitals want to do this week. So let's get into it here. Segment one here. Ross Mahoney just said what he has planned. And oftentimes these guys keep their plans close to the vest. They don't like to divulge any kind of information. But the big takeaway here is Mahoney just told us exactly what the Capitals want to do. And like I said, NHL teams don't usually do that. Most executives of his level this time of year, kind of speak in cliches like, the best player available, or we're comfortable wherever we pick. And we'll see how the board falls, those kind of things. You've all heard them before. And well, Ross Mahoney yesterday gave us considerably more than that, because, well, draft week is here and the Capitals are in a really good position. The first round, if you don't know, takes place Friday night in Buffalo. And for the first time since 2012, the Capitals are holding 2 first-round selections, pick 16 and pick 18. And honestly, this is one of the most important drafts the Capitals have had in years. And why do I say that? Because we're entering a completely different era of Capitals hockey, right? For the longest time, it was the old guard, Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom, TJ Oshie, John Carlson. Well, only Alex Ovechkin is the last Capital standing on the active roster. That change was a bit slow. Some people say maybe too slow, and ultimately why the Capitals kind of dwindled and swirled around the drain there for years is they're like, yes, this is the roster that got us the cup in 2018. We won't get rid of these players. We'll just build around them. Well, then Backstrom peeled away, TJ Oshie and John Carlson gets traded. But the encouraging part, putting all of that in the rear view, is the next core is being assembled right in front of us. And of course, who am I talking about? Ryan Leonard, Andrew Cristall, Ilya Morozov, Cole Hudson, a little bit further down, Lyndon Lakovich. And, now the Capitals get 2 more premium assets. And, this isn't just about adding prospects. This is about defining the very definition of what post-Ovechkin Capitals hockey is going to look like. And, the hard part, of course, is that there is not an Alex Ovechkin of the future waiting there for the Capitals in the draft. That they will definitely get some good players, but I think, just the fruits of not being in, win now mode every year have allowed the Capitals to amass some great prospects and ultimately put the Capitals in a good position. But Mahoney himself said, quote, "We're pretty excited actually to have the 16th and 18th pick. I think there are definitely going to be some good players available for us. It's not like one pick is 16 and one pick is 30. They're in a good range for us there," unquote. And, when I'm confident about one person, in particular, it is Ross Mahoney and his crew around him, as they always, in my opinion, knock it out of the park each and every year. But what his comments there, pick 16 and 18, it's not 16 and 30, and having some good range. That quote, when I read it, really jumped out to me, because what Mahoney, right, is telling us is they love where they're sitting. They aren't approaching this draft from a position of desperation. They're approaching it from a position of strength. And, honestly, they should. Historically, right, the middle of the first round is where teams separate themselves. And the Capitals know that better, well, than anyone. The last time they held 2 first-round picks was 2012. They selected Philip Forsberg and another guy you might know, number 43, Tom Wilson. And one became an elite player elsewhere, and is the fodder of conversation of the biggest blunder, in my estimation, by a Capitals GM ever. Because in return for Philip Forsberg, they got Marty Erat and Michael Lotta, if memory serves. But the other became one of the faces of the franchise, right? Tom Wilson. And, you take a look at him, a lot of questions, but a key contributor, the future captain of this team. And that draft, looking back on it, right, it changed the arc, or I guess I would say the trajectory of this team. Can this one do the same? Maybe, right? Mahoney also said, quote, "I think there's a group probably of 5 or 6 that I think our 2 guys could be in that group of 5 or 6, but I get surprised every year," unquote. And those surprises that come to mind is Andrew Cristall going lower in the draft than I think many people had thought. It was his size and his skating that was held against him. The Capitals scooped him up. I would also put Ivan Miroshnichenko in that mix, that, the Capitals, they had to look into it. This was a guy that had Hodgkin's lymphoma. They did their homework and made that selection. And, just more recently here as well, Lyndon Lakovic has been a good player as well, that the Capitals, like I say, I have zero doubt. I don't have all the faith in the world in what Chris Patrick will do, but if there's one man in the Capitals organization I have a lot of faith in, it's Ross Mahoney. But like you said, he gets surprised every year, and I love that. And that's why you ultimately have to pick 5 or 6 players, because if this player's not available, then you have to position. You can't be like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I was hoping that. Now I don't know what we're going to do. But, that is what he does every year, is disciplined drafting. You don't chase or panic. You don't lock onto one player and reach if he comes off the board. You draft in, I guess what I would say, tiers and in clusters. And Chris Patrick's front office has preached patience and long-term development from one day, and this sounds like exactly that philosophy. Then came the quote that everybody's talking about, quote, "If a center was available, I think that would help. I'm saying that because of the Ryan Leonards, Andrew Cristalls, and Lyndon Lakovic's. There are a lot of wingers. And there's always a need for defensemen too. Probably it would be nice to get a bigger defenseman in the draft if we could. Obviously, we have Cole Hudson coming along, but he's a little bit of the smaller variety. So if we could get a bigger defenseman and a bigger center, I think that would help," unquote. And, if you're an everydayer of the show, I spoke about that as much, that I think the Capitals will select a forward and a defender. And at 16 and 18, you still have great options. But that is it. That is the blueprint. Bigger center, bigger defenseman, and it makes complete sense to me. And, you look at the prospect pool, right? Ryan Leonard wing, Andrew Cristall wing, Lyndon Lakovic wing, that the organization is incredibly heavy. And if you paid attention on the Locked On NHL mock draft, I selected Alexander Command because I couldn't believe he was still there, so I scooped him up. Will that be the case? Will he actually still be on the board at 16 or 18? I don't know. But in the Locked On NHL mock draft, I selected Alexander Command at 16. You guys can check that out on the Locked On NHL page as well. Where are your future top 6 centers, right? That is what the Capitals need. That is a much harder question to answer. And if you look around the league, the elite teams are loaded down the middle. Florida, Vegas, Colorado, right? Centers drive championships. And Mahoney knows that. But notice the language, if a center is available, because this draft isn't simply loaded with centers. It's loaded with defensemen. So the Capitals, aren't going to force it, right? They need changes. That is ultimately what they're going to change or go after, rather. Another word that really stood out was bigger. Mahoney said it twice in the press conference, and I don't think that was an accidental thing. The Capitals have always valued size, right? Tom Wilson, Little Pro, Big Pro, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Marty Faravari, these kind of guys. Size, relatively speaking. Obviously, Wilson and Protas and PLD are bigger. But Pierre-Luc Dubois was brought in from another team. But I think you understand what I'm saying is that the Capitals do like bigger players. You could also put in that mix Ryan Leonard. You could also put in Lyndon Lakovic as well. And the Capitals want to be a team that is hard to play against. They want to wear teams down. And the Cole Hudson mention wasn't a criticism. I want that to be clear. Elite skills, elite hockey IQ. I love everything about Cole Hudson's game. But I don't think that was a knock. It's just stating the obvious. He is not a taller, bigger player. It doesn't matter. But I just want just a clarity there for you guys. He is an elite offensive defenseman. But Mahoney was essentially saying that they already had the archetype in place. Now they want balance. And speaking of size, there was another interesting update from Mahoney on Monday. Lyndon Lakovic, according to Mahoney, Lakovic is progressing really well in his recovery from season-ending surgery. Mahoney said, talking to Jason Service, Lyndon is doing really well in his rehab. We're still a ways away from camp. I know he's been skating. I saw him at the Memorial Cup out in Kelowna. He looks really good. Actually had put on weight as well. I think was up to 205, unquote. So you understand what I was talking about there earlier, a bigger player as well. And you remember the Capitals drafted Lakovic 27th overall. One of the biggest selling points was the combination of size and skill. 6'4", right? The dude can skate, score, can create offense, can elevate a team that is normally not that great. And then when he left, well, that team fell apart. But before the injury ended, he had 18 goals and 29 points in just 22 games, was wearing the captaincy with Moose Jaw. The talent has never been an issue. Health has been. A couple major injuries in his history, but now he's skating and apparently, like I said, around 205, and that's exactly what you want to hear. Because if there's one, organizational trend we're seeing under Chris Patrick and Ross Mahoney, it is this: the Capitals want to get bigger without sacrificing skill. You look at the roster: Wilson, Protas, Dubois, and the prospects, Lakovic. Ilya Protas could crack the roster. Ryan Leonard plays a heavy game. Now look at players they're discussing drafting. There's a clear identity forming, right? You see it. The players that, are being circulated, big, fast, hard to play against. And honestly, that is playoff hockey, right? The teams that are relentless. The Capitals want to become that again. And I loved hearing that from Mahoney talk about patience with Lakovic's recovery. The Capitals, aren't rushing him. They're playing the long game. Again, I don't expect him, of course, to join the Capitals this coming season, but I think it's a distinct possibility he joins them the following season. Of course, I'll keep you guys covered on Locked On Capitals. Because Lakovic isn't being developed for October. He's being developed, like I said, for a couple years from now, and the answer for a long time. And if he makes the expected jump to Hershey this season, just imagine that lineup. A pretty exciting next wave. And that's another reason why I don't think the Capitals reach on Friday. They're not drafting out of desperation. They're drafting for impact. So to wrap up segment one here, Ross Mahoney told us exactly what the Capitals want: bigger, stronger, more balance. The blueprint has been revealed. Now we'll see if the board cooperates. Coming up next here, who are the players? Let's go through the draft board and identify the names that fit exactly what Ross Mahoney described. I'll discuss straight ahead, right here. Workplace chaos can show up fast. That's where Indeed Sponsored Jobs comes in. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach candidates who actually fit what you're looking for based on skill, experience, and location. Finding the right person can make all the difference, whether it's building a business or building a winning team. And that is one of the things that I love about Indeed. One of the best examples for me is Logan Thompson. He wasn't the biggest acquisition the Capitals made, and nationally, it didn't generate a ton of headlines, but he ended up being exactly what the Capitals needed. The Caps needed stability in net, someone who could handle the workload and give them confidence every night. And Thompson delivered. It reminds me that the smartest moves aren't always about landing the biggest name. They're about finding the right fit at the right time. That's what makes Indeed Sponsored Jobs so valuable, helping organizations connect with candidates who fit their needs from the very beginning. And that is what I love. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs, and listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help your job get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on the Locked On Capitals podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. ED is way more common than most guys think, and millions of men deal with it at some point. HIMS offers a simple, convenient way to take care of your health by connecting you with a licensed healthcare provider online and giving you access to personalized treatment options from the comfort of your own home. No awkward appointments, no pharmacy lines, just a straightforward process designed to make getting care easier. Taking care of yourself shouldn't feel complicated, and HIMS makes the process private and easy to navigate. It's health care provided around your schedule and your comfort. For me, privacy is a big deal. Some health topics just aren't easy to bring up, so having a way to start the conversation discreetly from home can make all the difference. Sometimes that's exactly what people need to do to finally take action. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/lockedonnhl. That's hims.com/lockedonnhl for your free online visit. hims.com/lockedonnhl. Prescription required. See website for details and important safety information. Sildenafil is the generic version of Viagra. Viagra is a registered trademark of Viatris Specialty LLC. HIMS is not affiliated with or endorsed by Viatris. Get your daily Locked On Capitals fix completely ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today. Start your 7-day free trial now and get closer to the Capitals without the interruptions. Click the link in the show notes or go to lockedoncapitals.supercast.com to claim your free trial. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about the Capitals' options at 16 and, well, 18. Again, like I said in the first segment, I see the Capitals, if available. Alexander Command would be an amazing option, but who else? Who's there at 16? Because the biggest takeaway in segment 2 here is the draft sets up perfectly for the Capitals to add size on defense and, well, some offensive options as well. But the draft is loaded on the blue line. Right? If you looked at it, completely loaded, and that is great news for us. The Capitals' 5 or 6 defensemen, I think, could go inside the top 10. That means Talented players are going to slide. Let's start with Keaton Wirhoff. And to me, this guy absolutely screams Capitals. And what did I talk about in segment 1? 6'4", over 215, big dude. Right shot defenseman. He's not going to help the Capitals on the right next season, but in the future. And what do we know about him? Physical, competitive, heavy game, can play in all situations. The Capitals need right side defensive prospects badly. We know that John Carlson is gone, and there's some questions on the blue line, not just next year, but in the future as well. There isn't an obvious future top pair right shot defenseman in the system. I think that Wirhoff could become that player if he's available, right? You run up to the podium and make that selection. The next one is Carson Krells. I think he's a fascinating one for different reasons. 73 points in 58 WHL games. Just hockey IQ, right? That's what I noticed. Elite hockey sense. Excellent decisions. And Craig Button has him as a top defenseman on the board. He is a left shot defenseman, and the Capitals are a little bit heavy on the left side, but like I said, you select the best player available, and if he is available, Carson Krells, you run, because at the end of the day, talent wins. Another player that I did a profile on this show, if you want to take a look back on it, is Ryan Leonard. Might be the ultimate test of whether the Capitals truly prioritize size. Because Ryan Lynn's skill is obvious. Just watch him play. Elite skater, elite puck mover, high-end vision, right? Your modern NHL defenseman. But he gives off more Cole Hudson vibes. 5'11". But that's the question. Does talent override size? I think that will test the Capitals. Ryan Lynn, regardless of size. I mean, we can't have all Tom Wilson skating out there. If Ryan Lynn is available, you go and get him. Juho Pepperinen, another one I did a profile on, remains one of my favorite names. Right shot defenseman, already playing against grown men in Finland. And what do we notice about his game? Physical. What I would say reliable, defensively conscious. It feels like a good selection for the Capitals. On the center side, things become more complicated because we have Viggo Bjork, may simply be too talented to ignore. Outstanding hockey IQ, right? Strong two-way game, excellent playmaker. You'll have to forgive me on these pronunciations. Names that aren't necessarily roll off the tongue, but he's undersized. And again, what matters more to you is talent or size? I mean, I guess ultimately, if you could have both, that would be excellent. But I think that he would be a good option as well. And then there is Ilya Morozov. And he is a bit of an intriguing one. I've watched his profile. I've watched some of his games. 6'3", 200 pounds, responsible, smart, what I would say a long-term project. And this feels exactly like the kind of player the Capitals would target. Another player that I did a profile on, Nikita Klepov, a dynamic offensive player, elite shot, what I would say fantastic instincts, but he's more of a winger than a center, which is exactly what the Capitals already have. But still, if defensemen are gone and Klepov is still there, that is going to be tempting. Ultimately, my prediction, and this isn't too bold, I've said it for a while, many people have one defenseman, one forward, and that's how I think this ends. And, you got to remember, every year, mock drafts are wrong. You think back to Shane Wright, right? The look of like, what? Just the look of like that boy was never told no in his life. But, things do change, right? Players rise, players fall, team surprise. And that's what makes this week so much fun. There is so much fun, as Capitals fans, as hockey fans, as we have the draft and July 1st coming up right around the corner. So to wrap up segment 2 here, the Capitals have options, real options. And because of the depth on defense, well, the Capitals should leave Buffalo with at least one premium defensive prospect. Coming up next here, Spencer Carberry just received one of the biggest commitments in hockey, and the message from the organization couldn't be any clearer. I'll discuss straight ahead right here. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform, from sales and accounting to inventory and marketing. Everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't about talent, it's about having everyone work together toward the same goal, and that's true in sports just like it is in business. And why I love Odoo. One move that really stands out to me is the Capitals committing to Ryan Leonard from the front office, drafting him 8th overall, to the development staff giving him a clear path, to Spencer Carberry trusting him in meaningful NHL minutes right away. Everybody was pulling in the same direction. You could see there wasn't any mixed messaging. The organization identified a player they believed could be a part of the next core. And instead of rushing or second-guessing the process, they stayed committed to the plan. That's what alignment looks like, and it's a big reason why Leonard is such an important part of the Capitals' future. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That is odoo.com/locked-on. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So in the final segment here, we're talking about Spencer Carberry. You're thinking, again, didn't you talk about him last week? Well, I did, and at the time, all we knew is that Spencer Carberry got a new deal, an extension, but now Elliotte Friedman drops a pretty big morsel of information on the front of Spencer Carberry and how long he will be behind the bench for the Capitals, or at least how long he is under contract to be behind the bench. Because the biggest takeaway in the final segment of today's show is Spencer Carberry is the face of the next era of Capitals hockey, and if you're asking me, I wouldn't have it any other way. The extension, though, is massive. According to Elliotte Friedman, the Capitals didn't simply extend Spencer Carberry. Get this, they tore up his old contract and started over. Quote, saying they like him so much they ripped up his last year's contract and gave him a new extension, unquote. Wow, boom, mic drop. That is a statement. If we could see a little bit of that from Chris Patrick as far as player acquisition is concerned, I'd love it. But I like that they rewarded Spencer Carberry for a job well done. But a big statement, make no mistake, if the reported 4-year term is accurate, Carberry is under contract through the 2029-2030 season, right? Huge for the Capitals. And we're also hearing the deals places him among the highest paid coach in hockey. So, wow, one of. And, organizations do that when they know. Not if there's questions, but they know. And when you think about Carbs' tenure with the Capitals, when he arrived, the Capitals were, kind of caught between eras, coming off that, I'm going to say it was a poor decision that I don't think Peter Laviolette was the right choice for the Capitals, that right away, Spencer Carberry, shortly after he arrived, you're like, yep, that is the guy. But he has a hard thing to do, right? Trying to honor the Ovechkin years while preparing for the future. And many coaches, right, they fail in that transition. Carberry didn't. He adapted, evolved, and ultimately he won. And he does things really well, developing young players, working with veterans, modernizing the systems, and players. That's the big thing. Love playing for him. You don't hear any disgruntled players like that Carberry guy, I tell you. The veterans, including Alex Ovechkin, respect him, young players. And that is a difficult thing to do. I, as a manager where I work, that is extremely difficult to try to be something to everyone. And in a lot of ways, in a big way, I admire what Spencer Carberry is able to do to kind of cater, if you will, to, Ovechkin and all that entails, but also to have the patience to help develop a young player that's maybe getting his first call up from Hershey. That is huge. And ultimately, if you're not loving Spencer Carberry, then I don't know what. And I don't throw around that, kind of praise or superlatives too easily. The guy is the real deal. And the continuity is what I love most. Carberry coached in Carolina and Hershey. He knows the pipeline. You started in South Carolina, moved to Hershey, was an assistant with Toronto. There was some coaching with the Providence Bruins, if memory serves. The expectations are familiar. The systems are familiar in the Capitals organization, and that matters because you look at Leonard, right? And, 20 goals, 45 points as a rookie, Cristall coming in, Lakovic, Ilya Morozov, right? He's going to need to have that patience and development for those players. And the team, the Capitals, clearly believe that Carberry is the right coach. I believe it. The money reinforces it. Top 5 money, 4-year commitment. The ownership is not being cheap. They didn't want any sniff or whiff of this, that he wants to go somewhere else out there. That the ownership is investing. And if you're drafting at 16 and 18 this week, this is exactly what you want going forward. Stability, direction, and vision. And the right coach, right, to mentor and lead these young players that are coming up through the pipeline. For me, and I think a lot of you for years, we wondered what the Capitals' future would look like after Ovechkin. We're beginning to get that answer now. And, the good part for me, the confidence, the reassuring part, the parent telling you everything is going to be okay, is that Spencer Carberry is going to be a huge part of that. So to wrap up segment 3 here, the Capitals didn't just extend Spencer Carberry. They identified him as the architect of the next era of Capitals hockey, and that could end up being one of the most important decisions the Capitals have made in the last decade. So to wrap up the show here, draft week is finally here. Ross Mahoney told us exactly what the Capitals want. The draft board appears to line up nicely with those priorities, and Spencer Carberry is officially locked in as the leader of the franchise moving forward. We're coming up on it, days away from finding out who joins, right, to the next generation of Capitals hockey. And exciting. You got that, plus July 1st, free agency. Like I said, so much excitement surrounding the Capitals right now. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. As always, I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You, as a matter of fact, are what makes the show successful. And if you're one of those that never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is just for you. Get Locked On Capitals ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedoncapitals.supercast.com. There is also a link in the show notes. For those of you on the video side, we send you the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel on audio. Make sure and make your second listen NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI, and I'll talk to you again next time.